There's a particular kind of man you see everywhere now, and he's easy to recognize once you know what to look for. He's the one who stays exactly where he is. Same apartment for 4 years. Same job he complains about but never leaves. Same gym routine he abandoned 6 months ago. The same group of friends he sees out of obligation rather than genuine desire. But what marks him most clearly isn't the stagnation itself. It's the way he's become solid in his disappointment and fixed and crystallized around a narrative about how things should have worked out differently. You can see it in how he talks about women. There's a rehearsed quality to it, like he's reading from a script he's perfected over years of repetition. And beneath that script, if you listen carefully, is a quiet bewilderment, because somewhere in the back of his mind he knows that the woman who briefly entered his life didn't leave because of what he did. They left because of what he refused to become. Watch him closely, and you'll notice something else. He holds on to things. Old text conversations he scrolls through at 2 in the morning, screenshots of profile pictures from women who stopped responding 3 years ago. Inside jokes that died before they ever fully lived. He keeps these artifacts like evidence in a case he's building against his own inadequacy. And when a new woman appears, which happens less and less frequently, he approaches her like someone trying to recreate a photograph he once saw. He knows what a connection is supposed to look like and what an attraction is supposed to feel like, so he performs those shapes without understanding the physics underneath. He texts at the proper intervals, says the right things, agrees with the correct opinions, and then, inevitably, she disappears. Not dramatically, not with an explanation, just a slow fade, like watching smoke disperse, until one day he realizes he's been talking to himself for 2 weeks. What he doesn't understand, what nobody has told him, is that he's become the one thing that repels the very thing he wants most. He's become permanent in a world that rewards motion, solid in a reality built on transformation. And women, whatever else they are exquisitely tuned instruments for detecting stagnation in men. They feel it before they can name it. They lose interest before they understand why. And by the time he realizes what's happened, she's already gravitating towards someone else. Someone who looks less stable on paper, less safe, less predictable. And he watches this happen over and over, adding each occurrence to his collection of evidence that the game is rigged, that women don't know what they want, that everything he was told about relationships was a lie. Heraclitus would have recognized this man immediately, would have seen in him the exact pattern he spent his life warning about. Because 2,500 years ago, on the coast of ancient Greece, this philosopher watched men make the same mistake in different clothing, and he understood something about the nature of reality that most people still refuse to accept, that everything is fire, everything is fire, everything is flux, and the moment you try to make yourself permanent, you've already started dying. By the end of this, you'll see why the man who refuses to change is the man women instinctively abandon, and what it costs you every day. You remain static while pretending you're just being consistent. Heraclitus lived in Ephesus around 500 BCE in a world that was obsessed with finding permanence. The philosophers before him were trying to identify the fundamental, unchanging substance of reality: water, air, earth. They wanted to see the thing that stayed constant while everything else changed. And Heraclitus looked at this entire project and said, "You're asking the wrong question. There is no permanent substance. Change itself is the substance. Reality isn't a thing that changes. Reality is change. Everything flows," he said. "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." This wasn't poetry. It was physics. It was psychology. It was a description of how power actually moves through the world. And here's the thesis that cuts through everything that follows. The man who stops changing becomes invisible to female desire, not because women are fickle, but because stagnation signals biological and psychological death. Women aren't attracted to stability in the sense of permanence. They're attracted to dynamic equilibrium, to the man who is constantly becoming more himself, who is stable in his direction, but fluid in his form. The moment a man decides he's arrived, the moment he stops burning with transformation, he becomes the one thing female biology cannot afford to invest in: a finished product with no upward trajectory. Heraclitus used fire as his central metaphor because fire is the perfect image of change that maintains identity. A flame is never the same flame from moment to moment. The materials are constantly being consumed and replaced, but it remains recognizably a flame through its pattern of transformation. This is what women respond to in men. Not the man who has achieved something and now rests, Not the man who has become comfortable and now defends that comfort, but the man who is always burning toward the next version of himself. The man who last month was working on one problem has evolved to face a new one. The man whose body is different because his discipline is relentless. His mind is sharper because he's still feeding it. His mission has deepened because he's still interrogating it. Look at modern dating through this lens, and everything becomes clear. The man who gets matches on dating apps but can never convert them into meetings is usually presenting himself as a finished product. His photos are from 2 years ago. His bio describes accomplishments in the past tense. His conversation falls into the same patterns, asking the same questions, telling the same stories, offering the same observations, and the woman, even if she can't articulate it, feels the stagnation. She thinks that she's interacting with someone who has stopped moving, and her interest evaporates not because he said the wrong thing, but because he revealed himself to be static in a universe that punishes stasis with irrelevance. Or consider the man in a long-term relationship who cannot understand why his partner has grown distant. He's the same man she fell in love with, he tells himself. He still does the things she used to appreciate. Still takes her to dinner. Still says, "I love you," at the appropriate times. But what he doesn't see is that he stopped evolving 3 years ago. He works the same job at the same level. His body is softened because the gym stopped being non-negotiable. His friendships have atrophied into occasional text exchanges. His hobbies died. His ambitions became daydreams he no longer acts on. And she looks at him and sees someone who has decided that this is enough, that he's achieved the relationship, and now the work is done. And something in her, something ancient and inarticulate, begins to withdraw, not because she's shallow, but because she's looking at a man who has chosen to stop burning, and she cannot build a future around ashes. Heraclitus said, "The way up and the way down are the same." What he meant is that there's no such thing as standing still. You're either ascending or descending, either growing or dying, either becoming more or becoming less. The man who thinks he's maintaining is actually declining, because the world around him is in constant motion and he's being left behind even as he stands in place. This is why women are attracted to struggle when it's genuine. Why they'll stay with a man who's broke but burning with purpose, and leave a man who's comfortable but stagnant. It's not about the money. It's not about the status. It's about the direction of the flame. I work with men who all describe the exact moment, though they use different words. The moment when they realize a woman who used to pursue them has gone cold, and they cannot identify what changed. They'll tell me, "I'm doing everything I did before. I'm being consistent. I'm being reliable." And that's precisely the problem. They become predictable, and predictability, in the absence of growth, is just another word for death. The woman isn't pulling away because he did something wrong. She's pulling away because he stopped doing anything at all. He became a fixed point while she continued to evolve, and now they exist in different rivers. Let me show you how this happens in real time, because the progression is almost always identical. At first, the man is in motion. Maybe he's just started a new business. Maybe he's training for something. Perhaps he's recovering from a breakup, and there's that raw energy of reconstruction, and a woman enters his life, and she's attracted to exactly this. The sense that he's building something, that he's going somewhere, that his life has momentum. She doesn't need to know where he's going. She just needs to feel that he's moving. And for a while, everything works. The chemistry is easy. The sex is good. She initiates. She makes time. She's present. But then something subtle shifts. The man, feeling the relationship is secure, begins to relax. The business that was consuming his evenings gets put on hold because she wants more time together. The non-negotiable training routine becomes negotiable because she prefers sleeping in together on Saturdays. The friendships that were keeping him sharp fade because they become the default a couple of times. And at first, this feels like intimacy, like depth, like he's finally building something real. But beneath the surface, a different process is happening. He's becoming static. The fire that attracted her is being smothered by domesticity, and he's calling it love. This is phase 1. And most men don't even notice it's happening because it feels good. The reduction of effort, the comfort of routine, the predictability of knowing she'll be there. He thinks he's building security when he's actually building stagnation, and she doesn't say anything because she's not fully conscious of what she's feeling yet, just a vague sense that something has shifted, that the man who was so captivating 6 months ago now feels somehow smaller. Then comes phase 2, when the man begins to sense the change but misinterprets its meaning. She's less enthusiastic about his stories. less interested in sex, more critical of small things that didn't used to bother her. And he thinks the solution is to be more accommodating, to try harder at the relationship itself. So he does more date nights, more thoughtful gestures, more emotional availability. He asks her what's wrong, and when she says nothing, he believes her and tries even harder. But here's what he doesn't understand. The problem isn't that he's not doing enough for her. The problem is that he's not doing enough for himself. He's abandoned the motion that made him attractive in the first place, and now he's trying to compensate by becoming more present in the relationship. And this makes everything worse, because now he's not just stagnant, he's stagnant and needy. Phase 3 is where the collapse becomes visible. She starts mentioning other men, not overtly, but in passing. Stories about a coworker who's training for a marathon. A friend's boyfriend has just started a company, an ex who's doing interesting things now, and the man feels the comparison, even if she doesn't explicitly make it. He feels himself being weighed and found wanting. So he does what men in this position almost always do. He makes promises. He tells her about the things he's going to do, the project he's going to start, the shape he's going to get back into, the ambitions he's going to pursue, and for a moment, she might soften, but then weeks pass and nothing changes. The promises were just words, not fire. And she sees clearly now that she's with someone who talks about transformation but refuses to be transformed. I once spoke to a man who described this with painful precision. He'd been with a woman for 3 years. For the first year, she was deeply invested, but he'd let his architecture collapse, stop reading, stop training. His work had plateaued, and he'd accepted it. And slowly, her attraction faded. She didn't leave immediately. Instead, she became critical. Nothing he did was quite right, and he responded by becoming smaller, more apologetic, more desperate to win back what had been lost, until finally she told him she needed space, and within a month she was seeing someone else. Someone who, on paper, looked objectively worse. Less money, less education, but the difference was noticeable. The new man was moving. He was building something. His life had direction. And she attached herself to that motion like metal to a magnet. The man I spoke to couldn't understand it. He'd been stable, reliable, present, and that was precisely the problem. He'd offered her security in the form of stagnation, and she chose uncertainty in the form of transformation, because women, whatever else they are biologically and psychologically oriented toward potential, toward the man who is becoming, and the man who has stopped evolving no matter how much he's already achieved, registers as a dead end. Now zoom out from this individual story to the system he's operating in, because the modern world is uniquely designed to turn men into static figures. We're living in the first era in human history where comfort is the default and struggle requires deliberate choice. You can work a mediocre job that demands minimal growth. You can order every meal to your door. You can maintain a social life entirely through screens. You can satisfy every sexual urge without ever risking rejection. You can build an entire life that requires no transformation whatsoever. And the culture calls this progress, calls it civilization, calls it advanced. But Heraclitus would see immediately what's actually happening, a mass death event disguised as convenience. Because when you remove the necessity of change, you remove the engine of life itself. The man who accepts this comfort, who builds his life around minimizing struggle, is choosing a slow extinguishing. And women feel this. They feel it in his softening body, in his risk-averse decisions, in his preference for the couch over the unknown, in the way he's chosen a life that can be perfected rather than one that demands constant adaptation, and their biology recoils from it, even as the culture tells them they should appreciate a man who's stable and safe. Dating apps have accelerated this dynamic to an almost grotesque extreme. A woman can scroll through hundreds of men in an hour, and her nervous system is filtering for one thing above all others: signs of upward motion. Not what he's achieved, but what he's becoming. The man whose photos show the same setting, the same body, the same energy across 2 years gets passed over for the man whose progression is visible, whose June photos show someone sharper than his January photos, whose bio suggests ongoing projects rather than completed accomplishments. It's not about superficiality. It's about pattern recognition. She's scrolling through static men and dynamic men, and her biology is making the selection before her conscious mind catches up. Social media has created another trap: the man who posts about his achievements and curates a highlight reel of his life. presents himself as a finished product, and the more polished the presentation, the more dead it reads to female perception. Meanwhile, the man who shows process the ugly middle of projects, the struggle, the evolution, is presenting himself as fire, as motion, and this, paradoxically, is more attractive than the carefully constructed image of success. Here's what Heraclitus understood that modern men have forgotten: opposition is necessary for life. All things come into being through opposition. He wrote, "Comfort that eliminates struggle eliminates the force that creates character." The man who has arranged his life to avoid difficulty has arranged his life to prevent transformation. And transformation is the only thing that maintains attraction over time. She doesn't want to watch you rest. She wants to watch you burn. And if you're not burning, she'll find someone who is. The cost of staying blind to this is absolute. If you continue to frame stability as the goal, if you continue to build a life around achieved comfort rather than ongoing transformation, you will watch every woman who enters your life eventually lose interest, and you'll convince yourself it's about her fickleness, her unrealistic expectations, her inability to appreciate what you offer. But the truth is more straightforward and more brutal. You become a standing stone in a river, and she's moving on because she has to. Because life is motion, and you've opted out of life. Everything in you that isn't growing is dying. Your body, your mind, your mission, your relationships. There's no pause button. There's no maintenance mode. You're either ascending or descending, burning or cooling, becoming or decomposing. And the moment you tell yourself you've arrived, that you've achieved enough, that you can finally rest, you've started the process of becoming irrelevant to everything that matters. So here's what changes when a man understands Heraclitus. When he stops trying to achieve permanence and instead commits to permanent transformation. Notice when you're choosing comfort over growth. This happens dozens of times a day in small decisions you barely register. The alarm goes off and you have a choice: get up or stay in bed. You're at the gym and you have a choice: add weight or remain safe. You're working on a project and you have a choice: push through the difficulty or distract yourself with something easier. Most men default to comfort without even realizing it's a choice. The sovereign man, the man who understands that change is life, chooses difficulty, not because he's masochistic, but because he knows that every time he chooses comfort, he's choosing to become less. Stop presenting yourself as a finished product in conversation, in dating, in relationships, in your career. The moment you frame yourself as having arrived, you've made yourself unattractive. Instead, speak about what you're building, what you're struggling with, what's evolving, what's unresolved. This isn't about being broken or needy. It's about signaling that you're alive, that you're still in motion. The river hasn't stopped flowing. Women aren't attracted to perfection. They're attracted to direction. Refuse to let relationships become static. This is the hardest one because it goes against every instinct toward domesticity. When you're with someone, the natural pull is toward routine, toward predictability, toward comfort, and you have to resist it consciously. Not by creating artificial drama, but by continuing to change. By pursuing new challenges. By letting your body evolve. By deepening your mission even when she's asking for more time. By remaining in her experience of you, someone who is always slightly ahead of where she last saw you. This doesn't mean neglecting the relationship. It means refusing to let the relationship become the entirety of your motion. Allow loss instead of clinging to what's completed. The man who holds on to a relationship that's lost its fire, who holds on to a version of himself that stopped evolving, who holds on to achievements from 5 years ago as if they still define him, this man is already dead. He's arranged his life around what was rather than what's becoming. The sovereign man releases what's finished. When a relationship has run its course, he lets it end. When a version of himself has been outgrown, he lets it die. Once an achievement has been integrated, he moves on to the next challenge. This isn't callousness. This is an alignment with reality, because Heraclitus was right. You cannot step in the same river twice. And the man who tries to is just standing in memory while life passes him by. Embrace opposition and difficulty as the raw material of transformation. Most men spend their lives trying to eliminate problems, to achieve a state where everything is smooth and easy, but this is death. This is the extinguishing of the fire. The sovereign man moves toward difficulty. He chooses the complicated conversation, the challenging project, the uncomfortable truth, the physical struggle that reshapes his body. the intellectual problem that reshapes his mind. Not because he enjoys suffering, but because he understands that opposition is what keeps him burning, that the man who has eliminated all resistance has eliminated all reason for a woman to remain interested. Build a life that demands constant adaptation. Structure your days around challenges that force evolution. This is the practical foundation of everything else. If your job doesn't require you to grow, find projects outside of it that do. If your body isn't being tested, find a discipline that tests it. If your mind isn't being stretched, find problems that stretch it. Create conditions where stagnation is impossible, where the architecture of your life forces you to keep changing because willpower fails, motivation fails, but structure persists. And if your structure demands transformation, transformation becomes inevitable. Here are the two paths in front of you now, and you're choosing one whether you realize it or not. Path 1. You ignore this. You continue to frame stability as the goal. You achieve a level of comfort and defend it. You build a life that eliminates struggle, minimizes risk, and feels manageable and predictable. And in 5 years, in 10, you'll wake up and realize that you've become invisible. Women will look through you rather than at you. The ones who stay will stay out of inertia, not desire. Your body will have softened. Your mind will have dulled. Your mission, if you ever had one, will have faded into daydreams you no longer believe in. And you'll be smaller not just in others' eyes, but in your own. You'll know, quietly, that you chose comfort over life, and that comfort has slowly killed everything that once made you feel alive. Path 2. You take this as an initiation. You recognize that change is not the interruption of life, but the substance of it. You restructure your existence around transformation rather than arrival. You choose difficulty consciously and consistently. You let go of what's finished instead of clinging to it. You allow relationships to evolve or end on their own terms rather than forcing them to stay safe. And in 5 years, in 10, you'll be unrecognizable, not because you'll have achieved some final form, but because you'll have become a man who never stops evolving. Women will feel this in you even before they understand it. They'll be drawn to the motion, the fire, the sense that being near you means being near life itself. And the respect you receive won't be something you have to negotiate for. It will be the natural response to someone who has aligned himself with reality rather than fighting it. This path is more challenging, there's no question, because transformation is always more complex than stagnation, because letting go is always harder than clinging, because moving forward is always more complicated than standing still. But it's also the only path that keeps you alive in any meaningful sense. The only path that preserves your dignity, the only path that makes you worth following. The man who stops changing becomes invisible to female desire, not because women are shallow, but because stagnation is death wearing the mask of stability. You are not losing women because you're not enough. You're losing them because you've stopped becoming more, and she cannot invest in what is finished growing because her biology is oriented toward trajectory, not destination. She does not abandon you because you failed. She abandons you because you stopped moving while calling it consistency. If this landed somewhere true in you, share it with the men who are standing still without realizing they've started disappearing. Subscribe if you want this work to continue, and start moving today as if your relevance depends on it. Everything flows. Either you flow with it, or you become the stone the river wears away.